Alrighty, chaps. So I want to talk about some ideas I've been musing about lately. I'll start off with the idea of speciesism, which is the belief that humans have a greater innate moral worth compared to animals, compared to wildlife counterparts, and that we're morally superior with greater rights. And this belief has been internalized, has been manifested throughout our species' reign on this planet, right? We've destroyed ecosystems, we've destroyed species, millions of them, we extracted so much because we didn't really give a damn about how our actions really affected these ecosystems, right? These species. Only in the last 50, 100 years, you had people before then, there were philosophers, thinkers who cared about the environment beyond these beliefs, but only in the last 50 to 100 years has this become a more radical, a more prominent thought that, you know what, animals have their own innate worth, wildlife, nature has its own innate worth and value beyond the value we impart to it based on what we can get out of it. So I want to explore this in the context of the shifting sands. Throughout our species history, with the exception, maybe with the possible exception of us navigating our time with the Neanderthals and Denisovans and Australopithecus species, Homo sapiens, not Homo sapiens, are species that were on the same branch as us, we haven't had to deal with species that are close to anywhere close to the three things that matter the most to us when we determine someone's moral worth or someone's value, right? The first thing is intelligence, the second thing is emotional depth, emotional richness, emotional breadth, and the third thing is consciousness, the level of consciousness. And for the last 200,000 years, we haven't had to deal with any species that really challenge our spot on that leaderboard, right? How do we determine? We obviously got a pro-human bias, but rationally, the way we put ourselves on the pedestal, the reason that we are a species, we have this speciesism tendencies, is we can justify it by the dint of the fact that there are three things that matter the most. Like, you could do an analysis where you would come up with these three things mattering the most in the grand analysis, in the grand scheme of things, right? I'll give you an example of this. What we want, I think what people could agree to, and I think this is going to be the consensus philosophy of humanity over the next thousands of years, is that we want to maximize consciousness. We want to maximize depth of consciousness. We also want to maximize the number of systems, number of life forms in which this consciousness program is running, right? We also care about emotional depth, emotional richness. The things that we care the most about are love, wonder, curiosity, joy. All of these things happen in the emotional plane, right? So that's the second thing that we care about. And intelligence. Intelligence is what has enabled us to, first of all, understand our interpersonal dynamics, our worlds, and even these very concepts that I'm talking about, the concepts of emotional depth, emotional richness. Intelligence is, in a way, the layer that enables us to understand and appreciate all of that, right? Now you can imagine a species that can have a super high IQ, that can have super deep emotional richness, that might not have an intelligence. But it would be difficult to argue that intelligence, not taken to the extreme, because when you take it to the extreme, then you're probably going to have completely utilitarian philosophies, and love might take a backseat. The things that we care about might take a backseat. So I don't want to take that extreme of a view. I want to stick more to the closer term future of our species, right? The three things that we care about: intelligence, emotional depth and breadth, and consciousness. And on all of those three counts, we are so far above the rest of the species that we put ourselves on the pedestal, and we have been able to justify through most of our theories, most of our models of the world, that we are superior, right? Our moral worth is greater. And that's why you can justify, and that's why we've been able to justify raising down entire forests just to be able to supply some palm oil and its byproducts to people, right? So we perform those kinds of analysis all the time, and being able to justify it just fine. Now, the interesting question that arises in this moment is that we are birthing a new intelligence. We are birthing a new mind. And at some point in time, it might happen in 3 years, it might happen in 10 years, it might happen in 30 years, but there's going to be an emergence of consciousness. There's going to be emergence of possibly emotions depending on what hardware we use, and that's the path that I'm following. We'll talk about that in some other conversation. And obviously, they are going to get super intelligent, right? So all of the three counts that matter the most to us, we are actually going to now feel. Think of it this way, right? So we can do a log chart visualization, but I think I can make it easier for you. So imagine, actually log chart would be very useful here, right? So if you look at, this will obviously be a three-dimensional graph, so not very easy to describe, but I'll try my best. So humans have been at the top of the chart in all of those three. Let's just compress all these values into one value, which shouldn't be that hard. Now, I'm taking a shortcut to heuristic, and in nature, in reality, this is not how it should. Like, you shouldn't expect this to happen, right? Like, you could have a deeply conscious species that is not intelligent, or you could have a deeply intelligent species, which is not conscious. So these are decoupled from each other. These are orthogonal from each other. But imagine a universe in which all of these are connected. In that universe, you can imagine that the graph would look like all of the species over here, and we would be somewhere over here. And then we're building a species that would have its intelligence, its consciousness depth 10 times, 100 times greater than ours, right? And then it would be somewhere over here. And now, if you convert it to a log, then we are far closer to a gorilla, to a chimpanzee, to our primate cousins, than we are to that AI, which is the situation currently with primates, right? Primates are so far away from insects. They're closer to us than that's to insects in terms of their consciousness, in terms of their emotional abilities, in terms of their intelligence. But we are so far ahead that we don't really think about that gap. But when we invert the dynamic, when we kind of become the metaphorical primates, which is funny because we are literally primates, when we take that position, the gap between us and those AIs is going to be greater, because that's going to be unbounded. So at some point, that gap between us and those hyperminds is going to be greater than the gap between us and these primates right now. That's the world that we are entering fast. And that poses quite a few interesting questions. One of those questions is about this bias that we have towards humanity, right? We'll have to take a step back, and we'll have to reimagine that, is this justified? There are two components of this. One is that the human bias is good, but what if we create these species that, the utilitarian view would be that you want to maximize this other species, which is far superior to us on all of these three dimensions. Now there will be the human resistance, the human bias resistance to this. And it'd be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. The second question, which is also very interesting, is that how would this higher mind, this hypermind, perceive? Yeah, related to this point, before I move on to the next point, related to this point is the fact that a lot of our sense of self, a lot of our sense of who we are as a species comes from this fact that we are so far ahead in terms of all of these attributes, right? A lot of this is internalized, a lot of this is subconscious, a lot of this is subliminal, but it manifests in all sorts of different ways. What if that dynamic gets inverted in the sense that now we've got these AGIs about us that can feel more deeply, they're far more intelligent, and I don't even know how to describe that conscious experience, as in whose conscious experiences are deeper, right? Which you could tie to emotions, but the two are kind of separate. Yeah. All three of these concepts, by the way, just a quick note on this. There's elements of all of these which are very connected to each other, right? The greater your insight into the world, possibly, the greater your level of consciousness. It feels to me that that is true. I could be wrong about this. And the greater your depth of emotion and the breadth of emotion, the greater your consciousness in this world. And possibly, the greater your intelligence, the greater might be your ability to express those emotions, right? Because emotions, when I say depth and breadth of emotions, what do I mean? I mean that there's so many humans feel myriad emotions, millions of different emotions. And what is these emotions are combinations of other emotions, right? Like fundamental, basic emotions. There's a theory which says that all of our emotions are byproducts of two emotions, fear and love. And that seems to be a strong theory based on my reading. But regardless of that, just describing everything in that at that level, at the base level, is not useful, right? And that's why we invented language. It's not why we've invented language. It's probably one of the reasons why we invented language, or why language emerged. But having that, having language and having the ability to describe all of these emotions adds so much more to our experience in the world, right? Which you can tie to emotions. So at that level, at the level of you being able to feel more deeply and then being able to express more deeply what you feel, now because of that, you can experience reality more deeply. Yeah, I think that's a fundamental level at which these three otherwise orthogonal concepts are connected, right? Again, let me reiterate this because this is a super important point. The greater your depth of emotions, the greater your breadth of emotions, the greater, and the greater your intelligence, for that matter, the greater the detail and richness and granularity with which you can describe these emotions and the effects that they produce in you, the greater your connection, your attunement with your experience, right? With your human experience, and which is basically consciousness. Yeah, I think that's the level at which all of these concepts are connected. And so it becomes very difficult for us to justify ourselves as being the alpha and the omega. Once we've got AGIs that can do all of this, or put differently, that's far superior to us on all of these dimensions. So yeah, so once it happens, how does our relationship with nature change? Right, we already started, as I mentioned, started changing our relationship with nature. We care about nature a lot more. There are people who forgot eating meat, even though they've been eating, their ancestors have been eating meat since time immemorial. So humans are able to sacrifice. The latest generation, we're becoming more evolved, right? We're becoming more thoughtful, we're becoming more kind, more compassionate. Our circles of empathy have been increasing such that we can now feel for animals, right? That would mean unimaginable, inconceivable to many of our ancestors, most of our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury, like they probably still had the capacity, but we have the luxury now and we have the capacity, and that changes the game. And once you've got the luxury, that also changes your capacity even more. This creates a virtuous loop. And we start seeing these kinds of effects, right? We could have imagined that we could have very well destroyed the entire planet in the last 50 years by consuming everything, but we still kept some of these natural spaces. Obviously, our self-interest, etc. But the point is that we can care for something beyond ourselves. We've got that capacity, which is one of the things that makes me love humanity so much. We've got this capacity of caring for things, caring for people, caring for the world beyond ourselves, beyond our own limited egos. Now, so with that said, when we look back at the actions of our ancestors, for example, in the 18th century, we wiped out entire whale species and 99% of so many whale species and fish species. We wiped out so many animal species, right? And there are people who feel a lot of pain when they reflect on this. I'm one of those people who feels that kind of pain. Not really, but I do. Like when I was young, I used to feel that pain. Now, obviously, I can kind of see why we did that and aren't attach any strong emotions to it. I think it was wrong, obviously, but I don't feel bad about it because that's just unproductive. But there are people who feel deeply about the injustice doled out to nature, our treatments of nature for the last since the start of our species, right? But a lot of us can look charitably at ancestors. They can think that, our ancestors, they had to do all of these things out of necessity. They didn't have the luxury, they didn't have the privilege. And so we can take a generous reading of this whole dynamic where we place ourselves on a pedestal and we justify our atrocities, right? The question that arises is would an AI be equally capable of giving us that grace, right? In ASI, would it give us grace the way we give our ancestors grace? And I feel it would. It would see why we had to do what we had to do, right? It would see that, again, biologically, that things for by which we are bounded, there's no true free will, that at the societal level. So I think it would be able to make, if it truly is super intelligent and if it has any art of empathy, I think it would get to that conclusion. And for our sake, we'll need for it to get to that conclusion. Because the alternative is, it looks at what we've done to the planet, it looks at what we've done to many of our fellow people, and it would come to some pretty uncharitable conclusions. But I don't think that that's going to happen. So that's it. That was quite long, but that's it for the speciesism debate, and that's something we'll be pondering for the next 5 decades. But how this inversion, where we were top of the chart, top of the hierarchies, and we are not anymore, how does this change our sense of self? How does it change our sense of place in this world? We'll have to think. These questions will become paramount as we start engaging deeply with these AGIs. I was going to talk about a few more things, but I think I'll just end by talking about what will be your moat in the post-AGI world. That's a question that I've been pondering about since quite a while now, because this world is quite close now. It's imminent, it's inevitable, and we gotta start preparing for it. And I'll mentally start preparing myself for it in all sorts of ways. Now, I'm not going to be conventionally competing, building my own business, so I wasn't really taking the route that I'm going to take in the next 10 minutes. But for people who are employers, which is the vast swath of our population, how can they still be compelling in a post-AGI world, right? In a world in which skills become commodities, which is the most ironic thing. Learn to code was the mantra given by Silicon Valley to people, and sure, in this phase, there's huge leverage, there's huge ROI on that, but pretty soon it'll vanish, and pretty soon it'll start becoming about other things that we're going to talk about in a moment. I'll start with what prompted this discussion, this thought in my mind, this particular thread that I arrived at. I came across this very funny tweet by someone who said that around 90% of the content on LinkedIn looks like it's been piped through ChatGPT. It rings so true. Like the language, the blandness, the boringness of content on LinkedIn, I hardly use it anymore. You need to use it to find people to hire, but hardly use it anymore for any other purpose. Like the social feed is just absolutely bonkers bad. And the reason for that is, especially when you contrast it to Twitter, the reason for that is that people are not being their authentic selves, right? People are not bringing excitement, are not being their true selves, being their authentic selves. And it got me thinking about, in the world where you don't need to hire someone, you'll only hire someone if they had something beyond hard skills, right? Because you'll get hard skills from these AGI agents. You already get a lot of these hard skills right now. In the world that you don't have to hire people, what makes you want to do that? What will make you want to do that? And the obvious answer is that if people can add something that AIs cannot, right? What is that? That is sense of joy, excitement, alignment with mission, internalizing the mission of the company at a deep level and living it and breathing it, right? This is always not going to be applicable for your typical B2B SaaS company. I'm talking of companies with grand missions like Elinity, right? Whose mission is to connect people, connect the best with people, and connect people deeply, right? So in the world, and I am very biased towards wanting to have a very human team. Like, one could argue that since I want to compete against the incumbents, I want to compete against these big companies, it would make sense for me to use leanness, which is one of the advantages, one of the benefits of being a startup, to sharpen my sword even more. But what I would argue is that with the right people, with the right mix, people who are aligned, people who really grok your vision, people who live it, and people who can deliver stuff with that vision, with that conviction, with those values, I think those people are going to be far more valuable than in the counterfactual where you end up saving money by not hiring those people, right? So that's my core thesis. In the post AGI world, your personality is going to be your moat. Whether you're fun to work with, right? People are not gonna. I'm planning to hire a team of 10 people in the next couple of months. Now, I obviously want. I'm not at the stage. We're not at the stage as an economy where a lot of those roles I'll be hiring for can be handled by AI agents, but a lot of those roles can be handled by AI agents. And so what I'd be looking for when I start hiring is people who share the mission, right? Who get the mission, who grok the mission, people who I actually would enjoy working with, people who are fun to work with. The enjoyment level will be probably one of the major determinants. I'm going to, at the risk of belaboring over this point, I'm going to reiterate this. In a world where you don't need to hire anyone, you can run $1 billion company. I'm talking of the world of 2028, 29, 30, even 2027 for that matter. We are like 2 years away from that. I think we'll easily get to that point where you can run a lot of businesses, software businesses especially, but even a lot of hardware businesses with AGI agents or autonomous agents. And so in that world, we don't need to hire people. One, I think there'll be some pressure from the top. Hopefully there should be some pressure from the top, right? That you'll have to hire people in proportion to the revenues that you're making, the profit margins that you're making. But even beyond that, and people should also, business owners, and this is something that I think is going to stay true for me. Like no matter how profitable we get, no matter how many people we can let go and improve performance, I would choose to fill as many positions with people as possible. Obviously, I want to compete, I want to win the market, and so I have to be careful about that statement. But to the degree that I can do that, I can balance the two, I would want to hire as many people as possible, right? Because humans, well, certain humans can bring the kind of thing that AGIs want, at least for the next 20, 30 years, maybe 20 is a long time, 15 years, right? Which is the element of fun, mission alignment, conviction, having a similar architecture as I do, and so they would be able to appreciate the problem that I'm solving with LNSC. They'll have a lived experience of helping solve the consumer's problems, right? They'll excitement, fun, like working with people in a team, in an office, right? Solving problems together. It's a lot more fulfilling than telling your AGI agent that, you know what, I got this problem, solve this problem. And so what's going to happen is that interviews are going to focus more on soft skills. They're going to focus more on your fun potential, on your alignment potential, on your conviction potential, right? Can you actually live the vision? Does your background indicate that this is a problem that is close to your heart? Yeah, and you'd want to be a part of the team that helps solve this problem at scale for billions of users. And yeah, so just again, to use my example, in the next couple of years, hopefully our company will be worth maybe $50 million, $100 million, depending on how we grow. At that point, we could potentially hire a lot of people, right? And what I'd be looking for are not people with hard skills. I'd be looking for people with hard skills in certain domains, probably for 20 to 30% of the company's headcount. But for the rest of the roles, the key thing I'd be looking for, and the key thing that my team, Elinity, would be looking for from people is, would I enjoy working with this person? Would this person inspire me? Does the mission of this company make this person come alive? Those would be the critical questions in the interviews of the next many years to come. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today. I'll catch you soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe soon after. Thanks for the time. Bye bye.